Godzilla x Kong is finally out on digital for everyone to enjoy, and now that we've had a couple months to truly recuperate and form our own opinions about the movie, I thought it would be no better time to make this video. And what a time to drop this video indeed, as ever since the film has dropped, there have been opinions about how these guys currently stack up against each other power-wise. And no matter what side of the fence you find yourself behind, I think everyone agrees that the power rankings have changed. Some people might overrate the power change, and some people might downplay it. But like all things, the answer is kinda in the middle. So let's get into that. I know I've been promising to make this video for a couple months now, and I'm only now getting around to it, but I have good reasons. As one, last time I rushed a power scaling video to correlate with the new Godzilla film being released, I messed up some stuff. It wasn't anything crazy that it would affect the outcome of the video overall, but it was a dumb mistake, and I'm not trying to spread any misinformation. Two, if I had made a GXK video earlier than now, I wouldn't have nearly as much information to work with. This is a sentiment my friend Highflyer's tag team made, channel link in the description by the way, as he was a massive help. But he pointed out that if I had released the video sooner, my analysis would have been lacking a lot of information, particularly from the novelization, art books, director's commentary, and any other official medium, so it would have been pretty half-assed, not gonna lie. And most importantly, 3, it would have been pretty trashy overall. There wouldn't have been any real clips to work with on YouTube out at the time, and I have to pirate the clips from online and import them into the video to make them visually appealing. And even then, they would be in pretty butt quality, and you could only imagine pirating clips for a movie still in theaters for an audience of thousands of people isn't exactly protected under fair use. I love you guys, don't get me wrong, but I'm not gonna break the law for you guys. So with that being said, I hope you can understand the delay in this video. And if you're one of the guys who thinks that they know everything because you've seen a TikTok slideshow about certain novelization statements, trust me, the novel will only be one of my numerous outlets that I have to pull from. So how would this video work? Well, I'm not going to give an attack potency tier until maybe the end of the video, I guess, but all the comparisons for the most part in terms of strength will be presented in an inverse point of view. So I'll be making comparisons to other MonsterVerse characters, so you guys will have a pretty good gauge of what I'm talking about. Like how strong is Shimu compared to Ghidorah, and stuff like that of the sort. I'm just gonna be recapping the movie and I'll present the new buffs and such as they appear during the plot. So with that being said, let's work our way throughout the film to answer the question, how strong is Godzilla x Kong, the new empire? Alright, so obviously the first scene of the film is Godzilla fighting Scylla, and I guess it's a good time to establish what is Godzilla's base at the starting point of this film, because if you remember GVK, you know that the director made an odd choice of making Godzilla and Kong weaker than they normally would be, as Kong is explained to be out of shape and tired during GVK during sitting in a dome for a couple years, and Godzilla stated verbatim to be running on a half sleep, though I think it should be noted that he was also stated to be near full power, but just not quite up there. GXK thankfully makes it apparent that Godzilla was at the peak of his health and power via the novelization stating it verbatim, meaning that Godzilla at the very least is at the same level as he was during the start of Godzilla King of the Monsters, if not a little bit higher. The novelization also confirms that Godzilla beats Scylla in about a minute, which is consistent with our previous MV scaling chain video, but it's also a very underrated feat in itself, as Scylla prior to fighting Godzilla had absorbed nuclear energy from 30 missiles as well as numerous nuclear power plants from all over the globe. To put this amp into perspective, one nuke's worth of nuclear energy in King of the Monsters brought Godzilla from near death and totally immobile to attack stronger than Ghidorah. So Scylla was likely amped out of her mind when she chose to take on Godzilla, and it also kind of explains her confidence as well, as funny as that may sound, because Godzilla did dispose of her in a minute, and he was still at the peak of his vitals and strength overall after the encounter. This is a pretty good showcase of power between the mid tiers and the high tiers of the verse, as a super amped Scylla couldn't even pierce a full Godzilla's hind. From there, our main cast begins to speculate on Godzilla's actions, and it's here where we will get our reintroduction to the other Titan King, being the one and only alpha of the whole Earth, being Kong. Alright, so how's our monkey boy doing? And I'd say really well actually, all things considered. As previously mentioned, he's the de facto ruler of the Hollow Earth, and due to its very harsh environments, Kong has become stronger to adapt to his new environment. I mean, logically, he just becomes stronger as the inhabitants of the Hollow Earth are much more dangerous than the inhabitants of Skull Island. So in order to thrive and become king of this new environment, he's presumably been, fighting a lot of them and eating most of them, I'd say, probably. And it's actually confirmed that Kong did in fact get stronger, and he's presumably the strongest he's ever been. The novelization goes into this as it confirms that currently war bats are pretty much a non-factor to Kong now, unless they're in large packs. This is pretty good considering how 2 war bats previously were kind of pressing him. The novelization also states that he would be able to kill the Amskilla from the scene prior, so that's some more consistency for the gap in power between mid-tier and alpha titans. So overall, I'd say that base Kong currently is more than likely the strongest version of the ape we've ever seen. He should be much stronger than his GVK self, and he's arguably even stronger than his Kingdom Kong self, where if you don't know, in said story, he was able to physically overpower Kamataz multiple times, a giant bat-like creature who can manipulate a portion of Ghidorah's storms, which is quite the feat impressively in verse anyways. As the only other titans that have scaling to Ghidorah's storm are like alpha titans such as Mothra and Godzilla. So the fact that current Kong is likely stronger than his Kingdom Kong self should help cement his status as an alpha titan. Unfortunately, I can't really go into most of the Hollow Earth creatures as they have no real feats besides getting murked by Kong, whether being ripped apart, stated to be no threat, or even just beheaded off screen. There isn't really any one of them that has quantifiable scaling, well, except for one, and I'm of course talking about Doug. Yeah, the MonsterVerse Vanilla himself has, no joke, some new additions to his strength from this movie. But yeah, obviously MonsterVerse Vanilla is a joke. He's not related to Godzilla, but he kind of might be at the same time. As in all seriousness, the GVK art book states that Doug's species is either a revolutionary ancestor or a distant cousin to Godzilla's species, but going back to what I was talking about, Doug has gotten quite the buff, but it's not an attack potency buff as one might expect. But for those who are really curious about how powerful Doug is, due to his massive length, he would be generating small town levels of energy in his movements, and his speed would be around subsonic due to his sheer size. But no, the buff that he's gotten is in lifting strength as well. Yeah, he didn't hurt Kong, he did briefly struggle with Kong, and even seemingly overpowered Kong in a tug-of-war type fashion. So now, Doug objectively scales to some of King Kong's lifting feats. I kinda hesitate to scale the lizard to a full power current Kong in terms of lifting, but I think he should still scale the casual feats from a weaker Kong than the one he kinda beat in his tug-of-war. As in GVK, Kong was shown opening a massive Hollow Earth layer door, and he was exerting himself way less than he was against Doug. So how impressive is this door feat? Well, it's been calculated to be in Class G in terms of lifting strength, which is weight relative to all of humanity combined, or some of our largest structures. So as of right now, Doug unironically scales to weight relative to something like the Great Wall of China. Bro beats -1 and Shin Godzilla. But yeah, Doug scaling over, that's all he got. And it's also pretty much everything we have for pre-glove Kong as well, as even the other apes he fights are pretty noticeably weaker than him. And I don't think anyone wants me to really scale Suka. He has no real feats except for like scratching Kong, but even then, Kong literally ragdolls the poor kid and uses him as a weapon before throwing him. So yeah, let's hop right into the first big battle of the film, that being his encounter with the Scar King. Scar King by himself has some pretty funny scaling, as he's clearly the weakest of our 4 main combatants, with some people even call him the Frog King. But what is his scaling? Is it really that bad? Well, kinda, but not really, but yeah, it's complicated. But I just gotta say, Scar wouldn't be such a feared ruler if he himself wasn't stronger than his individual apes. Also, fun fact, the bloody paw prints that we saw throughout the MonsterVerse, yeah, Scar King did that. Talk about older level foreshadowing. But anyways, let's get into Scar King's scaling. Obviously, his main thing is that he's able to tangle with Kong, and whether some people want to acknowledge it or not, Scar King actually puts up a decent fight against Prime Kong, outmaneuvering him multiple times throughout the fight, outscaling him, drawing blood from him, and even flooring the previously established strongest version of the base Kong we've ever seen. And yeah, once Kong got his hands on him, the novelization confirms that both Kong and Scar agreed that if the fight went on physically, Kong would ultimately end up killing Scar King. So with this performance, where does Scar King individually scale? Well, considering that he dropped a Prime Kong, it wasn't like that much weaker than him. Alright, he was pretty noticeably weaker than him, but like he didn't hurt himself punching Kong, and his blows did actually hurt Kong, so it's close enough. And also, yes, both acknowledge Kong would ultimately win, but it's not like the scan says that it would be an easy fight or anything. It just says that Kong would win, which isn't really that much of an anti-feat in verse anyways. So with that being said, overall, I would have Scar King at around Kamataz level, maybe a decent bit below her, or depending on how much you think that current Kong upscales his previous Kingdom Kong self, itself, maybe Scar King's even a little bit above Kamata's, but I'm not sure about all that. I think below is fair enough. But bare minimum, I would have Scar King above all the Titans from Godzilla Dominion due to all those Titans losing to a starving, tired Godzilla who's slapping these said Titans like children and unironically like one-shotting them. So I think that Scar King is probably stronger than like Amalok, Skilla, freaking Behemoth, and Titans like that. Because despite what some people want to say, current 2024 base Kong should be stronger than Dominion Godzilla, who's literally starving. Combine that with the fact that Scar can actually endure multiple blows from Evolved and Gloved Kong as well later on in the film, and yeah, I would have Scar above all the fodder Titans, but he should still be below Titans such as Kamata's and Rodan, maybe a little bit higher, but in that tier of power nonetheless. But Scar has something in his arsenal that proves to be especially powerful, and I'm of course talking about the Scar King's most useful asset being his army. Got you guys again. And well, yes, these guys are individually consistently portrayed to be cannon fodder, but in the words of another great simian, apes strong together, as apparently in the ancient past, during the Great War, collectively anyways, these guys were able to almost defeat Godzilla, with the film stating that he almost lost, and he also had to resort to sealing them deeper into the Hall of Earth in order to win and escape with his life. Another thing to consider is that Adam Wingard has stated that Godzilla in the ancient past for big battles would supercharge himself, so Godzilla was probably supercharged against these apes. And while yes, Space Godzilla and by extension Supercharged Godzilla weren't as strong as their modern on-screen counterparts, but considering that most of the modern day Titans still find themselves losing to a starved Godzilla, it's still a pretty impressive feat all things considered. So overall, I'd say collectively Scar King with his army would jump up a tier. I think that he should firmly be above Kamata's and Rodan, and maybe even starting to approach something like Mechagodzilla for example. So in conclusion, I would have base Scar at around low alpha tier level, but with his army, he would be above low alpha tiers, such as Kamata's and Rodan. But obviously, he'd be below Ghidorah, Prime, and even a modern day Godzilla presumably. But speaking of Godzilla, what has he been up to? Okay, so when we last left Godzilla, he was heading towards the ocean, as he usually does, but this time the humans started to speculate about his intentions, speculating that he's powering up in preparation for something big, and that's pretty much all the context you need when we find him absorbing radiation from a power plant in France, as he's noticeably even more juiced, and he can even utilize a nuclear pulse after absorbing enough energy. Godzilla in this state is referenced to be supercharged, and on a visual level, he seems to be pretty akin to himself during the beginning portion of the Battle of Boston, where he had notably been amped. And if we're to dive into the novelization, his aura is even compared to Burning Godzilla, though it's noted to be not as extreme, so like, you can't say that this Godzilla is as powerful as Burning Godzilla, so yeah, don't do that, guys. But seeing as this is a confirmed supercharge on top of his base, where he was at the peak of his health, whereas the Boston supercharge was just from a single nuke, and this Godzilla is just even compared to Burning in his aura and presence, like just visually speaking, I think that this version of Godzilla should be more powerful than he was against Ghidorah during the climax of King of the Monsters. But this isn't the last stop of Godzilla's grand tour, as he has one more stop, being Tiamat's lair. This is because her lair sits in direct path of solar winds, making it by extension the largest energy stockpile on the planet Earth. And it's also stated in the film that if Godzilla were to absorb this energy, it would be another supercharge, so a super duper charge if you will. But first, Godzilla has to defeat Tiamat, who actually has some decent scaling, so let's go over her stuff. In the novelization, it's explained that after the events of Godzilla Dominion, Tiamat had basically made shop here, presumably due to its direct proximity to the solar winds, and she's been absorbing that energy for years now, a sentiment that's also confirmed by the novelization, meaning that this is a version of the serpent that is much stronger than before, as when we last talked about her, she was around the upper echelons of the low to mid tier Titans, as she gave a weakened Godzilla the hardest fight in the comic, Godzilla Dominion, but now due to her amp and years of absorbing solar radiation, she's actually able to give Godzilla, while he's in supercharge no less, a pretty decent fight. Well, I mean decent all things considered, you know, this is a Godzilla who's stronger than his boss himself, you know. Despite being dispatched of pretty quickly, her performance is a little bit notable, so let's get into that. Tiamat's pretty durable, and she was able to fight Godzilla even as he was tearing pieces off of her, and she was even able to stab into Godzilla and cut into him like a diamond saw, as the novelization puts it. So based on that, I can confidently say that she's gotten a pretty decent bump, with her being able to penetrate Godzilla's hind. With all all of this in mind, I'd say that she's above Amp Skilla from the beginning of the film, and she's definitely above all the garbage from Godzilla Dominion, and in all likelihood, she would likely fall into the same level of power as the lower tier alphas like Kamataz and Rodan, and I'd reckon that she's probably above the Scar King as well. So with that out the way, Godzilla still pretty easily dispatches of her and goes on to absorb the solar winds, causing him to supercharge and subsequently evolve. We know that Godzilla and Boston could utilize the supercharged power in combat, but it seems that in extended use of it over a prolonged period of time, that power eventually overwhelms Godzilla and causes him to blow up and die. And keep in mind, that was for a single supercharge. So you can only imagine how taxing a supercharge on top of another supercharge would be to his regular body, with even supplementary material calling it an overcharge. Seeing as how the whole point of Godzilla getting all this power is to fight something very, very powerful, Godzilla evolves in order to hold that power and utilize it in combat without dying or blowing up. According to the novelization, even as he was evolving, he continued to gain more power, and he was becoming more durable as well, resulting in the pink Godzilla we see in the film. Pretty much those two supercharges became a new base, and he still got some power on top of that. This is a sentiment which is consistent with the statement that says that evolved Godzilla is 2 times stronger than his previous base. Keep in mind, supercharge isn't his base, so likely 2 times stronger than himself is referring to, 2 times stronger than he was against Skilla, rather than 2 times stronger than he was against Taima. But utilizing this number, we can also assert that regular supercharge is around a 50% increase to his base, and Godzilla got 2 supercharges, which leads to evolve, which is a 2 times multiplier to his base. The form is confirmed to result in a stronger as well as faster Godzilla, and to support my initial premise of him evolving so that he won't blow up and die, this form is also referenced to be a battle-hardened version of himself, which can be interpreted as to be more effective in combat. And here we also find some director statements from Adam Wingard himself, as he akins this form of Godzilla to Rocky after he did his mountain training from Rocky 4. Which, if you've seen that movie, kind of just speaks for itself. The spikes have also gotten bigger to reflect his 20 times increased energy capacity, meaning that Godzilla on top of this state can utilize even more power and not be in danger of blowing up or dying. But keep in mind, the statement says that he can hold 20 times more energy, not that he's 20 times stronger. So this version of Evolved isn't like 20 times stronger than, base Godzilla. But with such power, we have to ask ourselves, what threat could possibly push Godzilla to seek such a drastic increase in power? And in order to answer that question, we're gonna have to head back to Kong, because when we last saw him, he was in quite the predicament. After defeating Scar King, Kong finds himself face to face with the ancient Alpha Titan herself, Shimu. Well, how powerful is the big freezy lizard? And in order to gauge her rank in the verse, let's talk about her lore implications as well as some of her statements. Alright, for starters, there are many quotes that confirm that she's stronger than Scar King, which is pretty obvious from the film, and that she's a weapon of mass destruction for Scar and his army. She is also who Godzilla was implied to be preparing for, with supplementary material stating that Godzilla needed to evolve into this pink state in order to take her on. And even then, another statement says that she would still be too much for him if he didn't have help. So literally, Godzilla needed a form and one of the strongest titans on Earth to hope to stand a chance against her. There are also many statements confirming that she is indeed the most powerful threat in the history of the Monsterverse, with even toy descriptions saying that she's unstoppable. But when talking about other world enders in the MV, another titan comes to mind, being none other than King Ghidorah. So real quick, since I know you guys are very interested in this topic, let me prove why Shimu is indeed more powerful than base Ghidorah. I'll go over how she compares to supercharged Ghidorah later during the fight in Rio, but we'll get to that bridge when we come to it. Shimu, for starters, is confirmed to have been the one to freeze Ghidorah during his initial rampage in the ancient past, but many people are still confused due to the lore established in Godzilla King of Monsters. And really at the moment, there are 3 really popular interpretations of how this battle went. 1, Godzilla and Ghidorah fought for an extended period of time, and after Godzilla won, Shimu froze Ghidorah. 2, it was a destroy all monster situation, everyone just jumped Ghidorah. Or 3, Ghidorah and Shimu had an epic 1v1 and Shimu just ended up freezing Ghidorah, subsequently winning. Personally, all 3 of these interpretations are pretty headcanonish due to how poorly the MV has done with kind of explaining what exactly happened, but I personally subscribe to the first interpretation, being that Godzilla and Ghidorah had a 1v1 while Mothra and possibly Shimu were there handling Ghidorah's army, as Ghidorah had multiple titans helping him out during the Antarctica battle in the ancient past, and seeing as how Godzilla won the title from Ghidorah, and it stands to reason that Ghidorah had some help, as you know, they thought he was king. Also, I want to point out that Godzilla would have been supercharged on top of his ancient base during the Antarctica battle, as Adam Wingard confirms that Godzilla used to power himself up in the ancient past for big battles, so that would include this Ghidorah fight right here, where Godzilla would beat Ghidorah, earning his title as king, where subsequently Shimu would freeze the loser, being Ghidorah. This interpretation of what happened in Antarctica is consistent with the lore and statements of King of the Monsters, while also leaving a lot of ambiguity so you can kind of place the new stuff that we learned from GXK. I think that if it was a jumping of Ghidorah like in Destroy All Monsters, or if Shimu alone beat Ghidorah, that would be pretty inconsistent with what we do know about, as previously mentioned, and I think that both of those scenarios would kind of undermine Godzilla earning his title of King of Monsters here, because one scenario says that Godzilla had like so much help, and another scenario says that he wasn't there to begin with. This instance isn't really usable for arguing why Shimu's above Ghidorah, because it's more of a Godzilla feat, to be honest, but I thought I had to address it because a lot of Ghidorah-tards like to personally subscribe to either of the latter two interpretations, to either say that one, Ghidorah is relative to Shimu, or that Shimu needed like help in order to be Ghidorah, just a bunch of goofy stuff like that, you know? And I can say that it's goofy because of our next way to get Shimu above Ghidorah, which is just really blatant. Like, surprisingly so. And in order to do that, we're gonna have to analyze both Titans' individual performance against an ancient Godzilla. And if you'll do that, you'll find that one of these Titans' performances is vastly superior to the other ones. So as previously established, it's very likely that Godzilla just straight up beat Ghidorah in the ancient past while he was supercharged, notably even leaving burn and scorch marks on Ghidorah's frozen body. So yeah, Godzilla beat Ghidorah in the ancient past. Pretty straightforward. Now as for Godzilla and Shimu's battle, that's a lot more complicated. But the first thing to establish is that the battle took place only 1,000 years ago, so already off the bat, Shimu was fighting a stronger Godzilla, because we know that Godzilla gets stronger as he ages. Like, these two battles happened thousands of years apart, and due to Adam Wingard's statements, we also know that it was a stronger supercharged Godzilla as well. So with all this in mind, let's analyze the performance, as we actually have a lot of major context to how the battle kind of played out, and we're gonna have to dive into the novelization and the art book respectively. But starting off with the book, Shimu was quote-unquote dominating Godzilla during this battle, and his supercharged atomic breath did nothing to Shimu except for make her angrier. Keep in mind how a weaker supercharged Godzilla's breath scorched Ghidorah, and this particular instance is really telling who's stronger. So with all this in mind, how did Shimu lose? Well, according to the art book, we see that Godzilla and Shimu eventually got into a beam struggle, which wouldn't be an anti-feat for Shimu, as Ghidorah was scorched by a weaker Godzilla's atomic breath, since a lot of people want to do that still. But eventually though, by the end of the battle, we see that Shimu was trapped deeper into the Hollow Earth, more specifically the same layer that Scar King was banished to, where he subsequently took control of her, as we see in the film. So to put it simply, base Ghidorah lost to Godzilla in the ancient past, while Shimu was dominating him and no-selling all of his attacks, and only quote-unquote lost due to being trapped deeper into the Hollow Earth, which is the implication from the art book. Like, think about it. You'd have to unironically argue that Godzilla beat Shimu and spared her, which doesn't make any sense. Godzilla spares some weak kaiju, don't get me wrong, but he's not going to spare someone who was no-selling all of his attacks, with the natives even explicitly drawing Godzilla scared in the depiction of the battle due to how badly he was losing. Plus, look at it from a narrative level. It explains why Godzilla drastically amped himself using 2 supercharges, as when he used 1 supercharge in the ancient past, he was getting bullied by her, and would have lost and only beat her due to sealing her away into a deeper pocket of the whole Earth, i.e. using environmental means. Combine this with all the previously mentioned statements that say that she's the strongest, and I'd say that bare minimum she's stronger than base Ghidorah, but seeing as how Godzilla needs help and a new Super Saiyan form to beat her, I think it's safe to say that she's at the top of the food chain, with her only real possible competition being supercharged Ghidorah and burning Godzilla respectively, but maybe even that can change by the end of the film. But yeah, Kong does about as well as you would expect him to do with someone as powerful as this, and he loses and has to run away or he died. But very notably, his arm is frostbitten after attempting to block Shimu's ice beam, leaving him pretty useless. Though I want to note, according to the novelization, Kong believes that he would have beaten the 3 Scar King minions that cornered him, even in the state that he was in. So yeah, when Kong put the dukes probably would have won. But for the most part, Kong is kind of out of commission in the state. But luckily for Kong, he's about to see that Godzilla's not the only one who got an upgrade in this film. After the climactic battle against Mechagodzilla, Monarch realizing that the most reliable ally couldn't handle some threats alone, they concluded that they needed a way to make Kong stronger. Thus, Project Powerhouse was conceived, with the goal of making one of the most powerful titans on Earth even stronger. The gauntlet once placed on the Kong's hand heals his frostbite-related injuries and seems to pump him up with some type of steroid or adrenaline, but whatever it is, it makes Kong stronger. And we actually have an official value as to how much now, as according to official promotional material, the Beast Glove makes Kong 2 times stronger. Despite this new jump in power, Kong and Jia both recognize that he alone is not enough to handle the threat presented by Scar and Shimu. So Kong ventures out into the surface in order to get the help of the King of Monsters himself. I want to point out the characters state that Glove Kong trying to draw out Godzilla would be quote unquote a suicide mission, which is pretty telling because one can make the argument that this group doesn't know about Godzilla's current evolution. So they're effectively stating that Glove Kong would be a base Godzilla victim. But we are just gonna have to wait and see if that notion finds itself consistent with the encounter that we're about to see, with one alpha called the stage is set for Evolved Godzilla vs. Glove Kong, the rematch. But before that, I'd like to take the time to talk to you guys for a second. At this current point, the video is very long and very extensive, which means a lot of information. And I hope you guys have liked it so far, but I want to point out that I wouldn't have been able to make this project nearly as detailed or nuanced without the help of these guys on screen, as they invited me to a group session where they collected data, novelizations, scans, statements, and everything you could think of. Even before the movie came out, these guys had extensive conversations about how everything would work out in the end. Their channels should be on screen now, and a number of them have power scaling content that I think you guys would like. I want to point out that in many ways, this video is a spiritual successor to High Flyers Tag Team's video, How Strong is Godzilla vs. Kong, which was a massive 1 hour long extensive breakdown of the film in the style of what I'm doing now. So if after this video you find yourself nostalgic for the old days before this movie came out, I recommend you watch that video as well. But I want to talk to these guys specifically now with the time that I have, and I just want to say thank you. The video is a lot better with your help, and I could not have done it without you. So with the knowledge that I got from these guys, let's discuss the fight of the hour. Godzilla starts the fight on the very clear offensive end, tackling Kong through a pyramid and pressing him as well. But I want to note that Kong at this point in time was indeed holding back on Godzilla, as confirmed by Adam Wingard himself. Kong at the beginning of the brawl isn't trying to win against Godzilla, he's more or less just trying to get Godzilla's help, but Kong can only handle so much disrespect, as Kong would eventually get fed up with Godzilla's attitude and utilize his new armored gauntlet to deliver a monstrous blow to the King of the Monsters, even dropping him in the process. From there, Kong would land nearly a dozen blows to Godzilla, leaving him in a state very woozy or dizzy or even briefly knocked out, depending to your interpretation of the scene. But I want to point out that this brief performance is where we will get a pretty concrete showing of Kong's rank inverse anyways. But for the Kong heads, don't get too excited, as I want to point out that Kong was pretty serious during this point, as while he started holding back, by this point in time he was fed up. All of those blows are very serious, and he intended to hurt Godzilla there. He lost his temper. It was like revenge for Hong Kong pretty much. So you guys can't say that holding back Kong floored Godzilla, because that's not what happened. But flooring Godzilla, and much less an evolved Godzilla, is still a very impressive feat. And I even kind of believe that Godzilla was briefly knocked out, very briefly, as the final blow to Kong and then him fast cutting to dragging Godzilla makes it apparent that at least a little bit of time has passed. But this short victory is short, as Godzilla would either snap out of this dizzy state or just wake up and overwhelm Kong with his atomic breath and proceed to pummel him into the ground due to the confusion left behind by the smoke. Godzilla easily would proceed to stomp out Kong. I want to point out that these stomps are confirmed by Adam Wingard to have been padded by the sand somehow, and he also stated that if the sand wasn't there, Kong would have died. I know it doesn't make sense, but I can't ignore it. So, I mean, it is what it is. And if anything, that same exact logic would apply to the over a dozen punches that Kong threw at Godzilla. So you can go both ways really, but it's still better for Godzilla, as Adam said that Kong would have died. So yeah. So while Kong didn't die to the steps, he was still trapped into Godzilla's foot, and his luck would soon run out as Godzilla would begin to charge up an atomic breath. With Kong being under Godzilla's foot and effectively having no way to dodge or evade the blast, Kong desperately puts his glove in the way in order to hopefully block the beam for at least a little bit. The novelization also points out that during this point in time, Kong wished more than ever that he had the axe. So to put it simply, Kong was cooked. But Kong just had a little bit more luck, because we don't get to see if his theory would have actually worked put into action, as he's saved by the Queen of the Monsters herself, being Mothra, who has some nice new lore and scaling implications that we will go over. But before that, let's sum up the Egypt fight. And what have we learned? Well, First, let's give it to Kong, because he was able to drop a bloodlusted Godzilla on the ground, briefly stun him or even knock him out. So it's safe to say that Kong has gotten a decent buff, as he was able to drop a Godzilla stronger than the Godzilla who fought base Ghidorah in Boston. But on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, his scaling is kind of hurt by Adam Wingard himself, because like last time, his Godzilla bias seemed to have come out somewhat, you know? He said nonsense. Because as previously mentioned, Godzilla's stomps would have killed Kong. While Evolved Godzilla is super strong, he's not like that much stronger than his boss himself, who Ghidorah was able to fight for a very prolonged battle. And yeah, Ghidorah eventually lost to Supercharged Godzilla, but it wasn't like 1 or 2 stomps. While Kong is getting tossed around, tackled, suplexed, and would have died to Evolved Godzilla, who's not that much stronger than his boss himself. So with this tidbit in mind, I'd say that Kong has indeed bumped up a tier, but he should still be below alphas such as Ghidorah and even like 2019 Godzilla in my opinion. But he's definitely stronger than Muto Prime. Muto Prime, yeah, she's out of the top 5 after this video. Just to say that. And due to Kong's showings against Evolved, he's pretty much also beating any Godzilla from the MonsterVerse that we've seen that isn't 2019 or base 2024, as I think he should be able to beat past versions of Godzilla, such as the starving variant that we see in Dominion. Kong Glove should also be able to beat Godzilla from the 2014 film, who was exhausted after waking up from eons of slumber, if we're going to use the word of the animation supervisors. So while Kong isn't exactly Evolved Godzilla's equal or anything like that, he's definitely no slouch either. But yeah, to answer the question of the day, Evolved Godzilla is considerably stronger than Glove Kong, which is a notion that will be even more consistent once we get into the final battle. But before that, let's talk about Mothra, because why not? If we could talk about Doug for 2 minutes, we can spare some time for the Queen of the Monsters. This Mothra is confirmed to be a different variant from the one we were introduced to during the events of Godzilla King of the Monsters. She's much older, and in fact, she seems to be the Mothra from ancient battles such as the Ghidorah fight and fights like that pretty much. Or alternatively, she's even older than that, as she is confirmed to be the mother of all Mothras, including the Mothra we met from King of the Monsters. Mothra already had some pretty good scaling in verse just from using that version of the character, but this version is probably much stronger, as she's confirmed to be always evolving, and another piece implies that she's even fully evolved, which are statements to me that imply superiority over her daughters. But she unironically has the feats to back it up as well. Mothra doesn't have too many feats though, due to her very minor role in the film, but all things considered, she's probably stronger, as she was able to drop base Evolved Godzilla, and she's confirmed to have done it very casually via the novelization. This might unironically be enough to get her above Glove Kong, who lost his temper in order to drop Godzilla, but Godzilla wasn't bracing for a fight when Mothra caught him off guard with the God Rays, so this could be an example of her just scaling to his body weight rather than physically overpowering him. But I'd still have her in the same tier of power as Glove Kong, as like the 8 Mothras confirmed to be essential for Godzilla rematching Shimu, which is a statement that Glove Kong has as well. She also pretty casually disposes of Scar King's minions, which is a feat that Kong and Godzilla replicate throughout the film, but you can also argue that she's above Kong depending on how seriously you take her showings against Shimu, where she was able to deflect her ice beam and even wing slap her to the face according to the book, which I'm gonna tell you guys right now is better than anything Kong was able to do against Shimu. So Mothra, like last time, is kind of a sleeper titan, with her having really good lore and really good feats, but it's just not very apparent due to her minor roles in the films. So overall, I would have her in the same tier as Glove Kong, maybe a little bit deeper into said tier, but around there nonetheless. So after that, Mothra convinces Godzilla to let Kong help, and the stage is set for the final battle. And this is the easy part. Since we spent the last 30 minutes covering all 4 of these combatants, everything that we see in this fight is just consistent with that, so I'll be touching up on the minor things and stuff I like, so let's just get into it. So starting off with the charge of both sides, novelization confirms that Kong could read Godzilla's face, and he was able to see that even in his evolved state, Godzilla wasn't truly sure if he could beat Shimu, even with his new evolved power, which I mean is fair enough, because seeing as last time they fought and he was buffed, she was unfazed by his strongest attack, and she was unironically clipping him. And unfortunately for Godzilla, his sentiment is not too far off, as throughout the fight it's confirmed that Shimu is indeed stronger than evolved Godzilla. But anyways, the fight begins and the gravity is distorted due to our human characters anyways. In a scene that's actually really fun, Kong gives Scar them 2018 Kratos Kratos combos, while Godzilla is spinning himself around like a fidget spinner and disposing of Scar King's minions, and propelling himself towards Shimu. According to the novelization, it's confirmed that all 4 of our Titans adapted to the zero gravity environment, so that's some nice scale stuff, I guess. But later on, Shimu actually freezes Godzilla and Mothra has to save him, as previously mentioned. Godzilla actually just busts out of the ice, and Wingard has confirmed that one aspect of his evolved state is that Godzilla can heat up his body in order to prevent Shimu from freezing him. Eventually, the battle finds itself to the surface of Rio. Scar and Shimu arrive first, and Shimu freezes a huge chunk of the city. And I think that this is the best time to mention that Shimu's ice breath is likely not only subatomic in nature due to its scaling to base Godzilla's atomic breath, but it's also fired at absolute 0 degrees, as it's confirmed in the book to slow down atoms, which is an attribute of that temperature. Eventually though, Kong and Godzilla show up and the final portion of the battle begins. Godzilla slams Shimu throughout the city, but it's all in vain, as the novelization confirms that Shimu was making Godzilla look like a middleweight and she was a heavyweight in comparison. So Godzilla gets tossed to the side and Scar uses this opportunity to utilize Shimu to jump Kong with him. And as of now, the tide of the battle seems pretty hopeless, until yes, that's right, Godzilla supercharged himself once again on top of his evolved state, resulting in power and attack that I, as a Godzilla fan, haven't seen in 20 years, as after 5 monstrous films, Godzilla finally gains the Spiral Heat Ray. In this state, Godzilla will go from losing to Shimu to actually being really relative to her, with the novel stating that it was a toss-up. So with this in mind, how powerful is he now in verse? And well, the answer is pretty concrete and very blatant. It's just that some people don't want to acknowledge it for whatever reasons, as the novelization states that he was generating energy never seen before, and that said energy was stronger than anything seen before as well. And seeing as how Burning Godzilla is referenced the sentence right before this one, yeah, it seems that the book is telling us that supercharged evolved Godzilla is stronger than Burning, which is a sentiment that should be consistent with sheer multipliers, as right now the power that currently Godzilla is wielding is barely being contained. And if you guys remember, Godzilla has an increased energy capacity up to 20 times above his old base. So when they say that the energy is barely being contained, that means that Godzilla is truly utilizing that 20 times multiplier right here. But despite that, some people seem to cope still. And they say things like Monarch has no readings about Burning Godzilla, which, I mean, there are multiple in-universe examples of Monarch having exactly that, but that doesn't even really matter, as the second statement that says that he's even stronger than ever before is a sentiment confirmed by the narrator himself. So it really doesn't matter if Monarch has readings on Burning or not, even though they more than likely do, because the narrator himself says that it's stronger than anything before. And once again, Burning is referenced the sentence right before this one, so yeah, that's pretty concrete right there. I mean, Adam Wingard, this whole entire promotional run has been hyping up Evolved Godzilla to be stronger than Burning, so there's a lot of statements that say it, man. But another interpretation does exist that actually explains that both forms are roughly relative in power, but not really at the same time. Because the author of the book, when asked about his statements, he kind of hesitates to say that Evolved is straight up stronger than Burning, but seeing as how he wrote a lot of the sentences that compare the two, and even liken the energy and aura to each other. But I think it's very notable that he doesn't really confirm if one is stronger or weaker than the other. He kind of just says, I don't know, which implies relativity to me. But he confirms that this new state is more controlled and focused, which means that bare minimum Godzilla's Spiral Ray is equivalent to Burning Godzilla's pulses. Seeing as how Burning Godzilla's pulses went everywhere and only a small fraction of the full pulses managed to actually hit its opponents, whereas the Spiral Ray is concentrated and focused onto a single point. Logically, even using this interpretation, the Spiral Ray, by all intents and purposes, would be a more powerful attack. And using this, we can actually answer a pretty big question that a lot of people have been asking. What's a better durability feat? Tanking a nuclear bomb, but only tanking the small fraction that makes up your body due to your size and proximity to the full blast, or tanking a bullet that was somehow the power of that said nuke concentrated and controlled into a single point, where its full yield is shot at you and factors such as your size and proximity to the blast are rendered irrelevant. This is important because supercharged Ghidorah was critically injured by Burning Godzilla's pulses, even though major parts of the explosion didn't even touch Ghidorah, whereas the Spiral Heat Ray is the full explosion concentrated into the form of atomic breath that Shimu took point blank and barely was phased in the slightest. So yes, with this showing right here, Shimu is not only stronger than base Ghidorah, she's stronger than supercharged Ghidorah as well, and relative to high tiers such as Burning Godzilla. but more than likely even superior to him, as Godzilla once again is just stated by the narrative to be stronger than ever before, as Shimu scales due to their battle becoming a toss-up when he's in this state. But a lot of people still cope about this information, even though it's supported by the narrative, statements, and just sheer numbers. But there's always going to be some cope arguments, so let's handle that real quick. People will attempt to bring up Shimu's being dropped by base evolved Godzilla's atomic breath in an attempt to say that her showing against the spiral heat rate is inconsistent, but they fail to realize that Shimu was caught off guard by this attack at the start of the fight, and that, like the Mothra instance, this is more of an example of Godzilla's atomic breath being able to move her body weight rather than just straight overpowering her. Next up, people will attempt to downplay the power of supercharged Godzilla by bringing up the fact how the beam barely grazed Scar King for a second and he didn't instantly die. Well, fortunately for us, Adam Wingard's got this one covered, as he stated that during the director's commentary of the film that he knew based on Godzilla's new power, it should by all means one-shot him. So he spent a lot of time trying to convey that it was simply a graze. In simple terms, this small part is a narrative concession, because if the beam killed Scar here, it would take away from Kong's moment later on at the end of the fight. It's like when Thanos punches Captain America, or when Superman slaps Batman, or when Perfect Cell slaps Hercule. It's simply a narrative thing that's not actually indicative of Scar or any of these characters' true durability. And even then, Scar was only grazed by it for like a second. And we see how messed up his back is after the fact, so it's whatever. Also, while I'm here talking about debunks, let's talk about Jared, as he has a lot of statements that some of the Ghidorah retards like to cling to. As when asked on the topic of Ghidorah versus Shimu, he said that the affair will be evenly matched. Statements like this fall under the death of the author fallacy, as Shimu's lore and feats are simply superior to even an amped Ghidorah's physical limits. But Jared has also conceded that his word on kaiju matchups is just kind of his own opinion and not to be taken as official, so stop using that screenshot, it doesn't mean anything. So unfortunately, Ghidorah is still relevant in the verse, but instead of being number 2, he's number 3 now. Adam Wingard made sure of that. But anyways, let's wrap it up. As the fight reaches its climax, Tsuko eventually comes in and destroys the crystal, freeing Shimu from Scar's control, where she subsequently betrays him and Kong smashes him to bits. Godzilla proceeds to fix Shimu's mess, and all parties go their separate ways, but living happily ever after, stronger and with more allies than before. And just like that, we did it. We covered the whole film and essentially answered all the major questions. Right now, I'm going to put up a tier list on screen to show how I think the verse has changed power-wise. This was an extremely extensive breakdown, and I hope that answered a lot of your questions. If you guys want an attack potency/speed tier for any of these guys, I recommend you guys check out one of the dozens of the videos I have on the Monsterverse. Heck, just last week I gave you guys perhaps the most extensive breakdown of Monsterverse Godzilla. The comment of the week will be Evolved. This is by far the longest video on the channel, and it's kind of like roughly the size of 2 videos usually. So if you made it this far, let me know. By dropping the comment, I won't only know that you're a real one, but you can drop any feedback or any criticisms, or if you even agreed with this video. I'm always down to hear you guys' opinions, even though I think personally I give you guys the most objective, concrete, interpretation of this film. For starters, it's 40 minutes long, But as for me though, I'll see you guys next week, but until then, stay big G fans.